It was another great week in baseball this week, and we have reached the quarter pole here, something that we like to talk about. And we're going to look at individual stats and see how they might project out over 162 games. It's this week in baseball. So remember when Tyler Soderstrom of the A's hit his ninth home run before anybody else, I think, got close to nine, just going back a mere few weeks ago. Well, currently Tyler Soderstrom has 9 home runs.
Right. The train kind of stopped there for him, at least
and,
for the time being. So he's not going, he was on pace to hit 70
72.
something home. What?
It's 72.
72 home runs. Yeah, obviously he's not going to hit that over the course of the season.
And coming from behind, not surprisingly, who now leads major leagues in home runs after his 2 home run performance on Saturday, is the Yankees' Aaron Judge, and he's got 14 home runs. And since we're at, some teams have played 42 games, some teams have played 38 or 39. So let's say it's about a quarter of the season. We're using this as a rough estimate. So that would put Judge at about 56 home runs. Yeah, that sounds projectable.
Really, if we just project him out, he just has a casual season where he hits 400 with 56 home runs. Because
He's no hitting 400 though.
he was hitting 400 as of yesterday.
Right, I think it's last I saw was 396, and the Yankees are.
Right, so he might have made an out or two today, and he's dropped below 400. But obviously, it looks like, he is on his way to what might end up being an even more impressive MVP season than he put up last season.
Oh, that's right, and you are right. Actually, today he's had a good day here on Sunday as the Yankees are finishing up, wiping the Athletics out, and he is back up to 401, and he also has 39 RBIs now. So if you do that, he's going to come up with 156 if it's exactly times four. What I thought, and that's quite interesting because the last guy to hit over 150 RBIs also played for the Yankees and also had 156 RBIs in a season. It is the beloved A-Rod.
So, beloved, okay, going strong there.
Man,
But
not even by Yankee.
obviously,
No, you think Yankee fans are? Is Alex Rodriguez beloved by Yankee fans? I don't know.
I couldn't tell you honestly. That's a hard one to predict. But I think what's interesting is yes, as much as we want to project out, obviously, oh yes, Aaron Judge hit 14 home runs in the first quarter of the season. He's going to hit 14 home runs in every quarter of the season. We all kind of know it doesn't work that way because both Aaron Judge could have a portion of this season where he goes crazy and hits even more home runs. Because, he's had season where he's hit more, so he's got to hit a better pace than 14 over a quarter of a season to get more than, 60 home runs. But I think what's interesting is you're probably not going to there's certain categories you're not going to be able to catch up on. Like, if you're somebody that wants to compete for a batting title, you can't still be hitting 250 at this point in the season. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to raise your average by the amount of average you would need 80 plus points you're going to need to raise it just to get into the conversation over 3/4 of a season. You'd have to hit at such an unsustainable clip to do that. Whereas Judge, he gets the benefit of now front running the batting title for a good portion of the season. He's 50 points ahead of his next closest guy, basically. So even if he falls back, he's got to fall back such a magnitude of more than even that guy has. Is Jacob Wilson, who's putting an unbelievable season together for the Athletics. Is he going to keep hitting 353? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I would think that his BABIP, Jacob Wilson, has got to be crazy because he only has 7 walks all season. So obviously, he's doing it mostly,
I
by
will say
hitting.
this though, for a guy that doesn't walk a lot, he's got incredible plate discipline because he's only struck out 9 times at the same time. So he
Yeah.
puts the ball in play. That's a very Luis Arias style thing.
One of the other things I noticed, when you look at besides Judge and defending his 400, and you're right, like you said, he's got a 50-point lead. Is that Pete Alonso started out obviously being at around 400, and we all know that's not sustainable. And he's down to 320 at this point, but he doesn't. He's basically trying to defend not hitting under 260, so he's already
Right.
got a great lead on that.
Right. Honestly, Pete can hit. If Pete hits 290 the rest of the way, Pete plays himself into an MVP conversation for this season. That's how good he's playing and the type of season he's putting up for the Mets, and he's going to probably continue to put up for the Mets. So
Yeah,
I think
you're right.
I think the surprising thing is there's certain guys like I don't think Pete Crow Armstrong is about to go off for 40 this season for the
Yeah.
Cubs.
Yeah, hit his 10th home run today, and certainly he, as we discussed in our podcast last week, he has now announced himself as a legitimate, Major League Baseball center fielder. And I think that the important thing is that he's playing center field, and so anything you get offensively from center field these days is a plus, right? Because we put a premium on defense there, and he is a premium defender.
Unlike the other cast-off Mets outfielder in Jared Kelenic, who really can't play himself into a major league lineup, Crow Armstrong at least has put up a strong enough stretch here where you're not going to really have questions about his bat for at least the rest of the season. You might get into that next year, whereas if he had a terrible rest of the year, like he just completely reverts into what he was doing before, you might go, was April and May an aberration? Like, I don't know. We'll have to see. But you've at least quelled the fear of okay, is this guy maybe just a Jose Siri? Is he just
Right.
a Kevin Pilon? Or is now you're thinking, okay, no, he's a real player, and he might even be something more than that.
It's interesting about that position, right? Because a couple of years ago, the Braves' Michael Harris, was announced himself with the season and the contract as an elite center fielder with all the tools necessary, power, speed, and all that. And he just ever since he kind of was given that job and all that stuff, it hasn't been quite as good. It wasn't that good last year, and it hasn't been super great. He's okay, but maybe not what we thought he was headed for.
No, no, and I think that's that was the concern with those contracts the Braves handed out is that we've seen guys come out and have unbelievable first seasons. If you wanted to pay Mark Vientos like the third baseman he showed he was last season, that's a big promise to live up to the rest of the way. And now he's kind of starting to turn it around now. The bat's starting to come online, but he did not immediately come out the gate, and that's the risk you take with these young guys that have a great first season is sometimes I think pitchers can know what a guy's weakness is, but it might take them a while enough to respect him to actually pitch to that. I think with rookies, sometimes there's an element with a lot of pitchers of okay, I'm going to make you earn the right for me to pitch to you. I'm just going to try and outstuff you because you're a rookie. And you're
Right.
going to get that probably your first time through the league almost. And then in year two, now you're Mark Vientos. Everybody's like, nah, you're a problem. We're going to pitch to you every single at bat. And we're not going to challenge you maybe in ways we were willing to challenge you last year.
For years they would say that the league has got the book on the guy, right? All of a sudden, as if pitchers were passing around this little black notebook that this is how you get these guys out. Mark Vientos, you do this, you do that. But now all the stats are so public, and there's so many of
And the
them from
video
so
is so
many.
good.
There's no way to keep that stuff secret, so you really don't have to keep a book on anybody. Everybody's keeping a book on everything.
Right, the book already exists. It's not like they need a full season to put it together. I think that just the first year around, teams are probably like if you're a pitcher and you're a catcher, especially if you're a pitcher, you got a rookie up there, and yeah, he's maybe been playing well. He's had a good stretch, but especially depending on the type of pitcher, you might just think I'm just better than him. I'm not going to waste the effort of trying to really locate here. I'm just going to outstuff the guy. And you might get a bunch of challenge fastballs, and then everybody's like, okay, yeah, that doesn't work.
Right, right. And all of a sudden they'll adapt to it, and they'll adapt it from start to start. By the way, based upon what they've seen the opposing pitchers do to particular hitters. I mean, everybody's got video and stats on everyone. So, like I said before, no one's being fooled at all, or doesn't have the book. So tell me, when you look at the performance of players over the let's say a quarter of the season as we're here, like there's not one stat that sort of encapsulates everything, but if you had to say, okay, between Judge and Otani and Tatis and Kyle Tucker, all having great seasons right so far, Corbin Carroll and Mookie Betts, like what if you had to say, okay, well, what would I like to see? Like, how could I sort of evaluate where they are? Do you have one stat? Can you have one
Feel like
stat?
OPS and OPS plus are generally the best, at least for offensive players, because it's really hard to craft a player like Aaron Judge has an OPS of 1270. It's really hard to craft a
Yep, I agree.
player that would somehow not have an OPS that approaches that, but is having the same amount of impact as Aaron Judge. Like it would have to be some kind of wacky thing where like, oh, we've got the batter that's like he's like a weird height and he's got the single greatest eye that we've ever seen. So he's got an on base of like 600, but he can't swing the bat at all, so he never has no slugging. And it's just
Sounds
like,
like Barry
okay,
Bonds.
right, right. And it's just like, okay, yeah, I guess if this guy walks 6 out of 10 times, that's worth it. And so, because that's such a weird outlier. But like, no, nobody like that exists.
Right, 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 and and that's saved. And not to get all Metsy, but Juan Soto, who so far I would say from the Mets, I'm happy with him being there. Obviously, he's getting paid unbelievable amounts of money, as we all know. But he walks a lot, and so even though he really hasn't had quite the offensive surge you'd want when you look at his on base average and all that, he's in the top five of the league, that's only because of his amazing eye, and that's such an important part of his success and any player's success.
Right. It's a huge, it makes a big difference when you're somebody that is able to find a way to get on base. Like Juan Soto has managed to draw 30 walks this season despite hitting 250. So he's not hitting the ball with a ton of authority yet, and he's still managing to get on base a ton, which makes him really valuable, especially when he's behind Lindor, who's also finding a way to get on base a ton. And when your top two guys in the lineup are getting on base all the time, good things are going to happen for your team.
Well, and add to that the fact that Alonso's had an unbelievable first quarter, as we said, and so he's batting behind Soto. So you would think traditionally that Soto's would get more pitches to hit, given that Alonso is behind him. Well, I don't know that that's really happened, and that's why he's got
I
so
think
many
you just
walks,
missed
right?
those pitches to hit. But that's what
Yeah.
you're seeing with the best offenses in baseball. You're seeing that with the Dodgers. You're seeing that with the Cubs. You're seeing that with the Phillies and the Diamondbacks and even the Padres. All of these lineups are multiple hitters deep. It's not enough just to have that nice 3-4-5 punch anymore. Because yeah, that's really nice. And there's some teams that have that. But I think there's a lot of people, even Yankee fans included, that look at that lineup and go, Aaron Judge is amazing. He's the best hitter in baseball, maybe the best player in baseball, depending because until Shohei Ohtani starts pitching again, Judge is a better hitter and he plays the field, so he kind of has to get it over Ohtani until Ohtani starts pitching. But if you're looking at that lineup, you're like, oh man, are we really rolling the dice that Paul Goldschmidt will continue to find the fountain of youth and hit 340, and Ben Rice really is this good? But that's a lot to ask from that lineup.
Well, and that's why quarter pole is just, a joke. I guess for the best players, it's more of an indicator because you understand their track record. So, for instance, you mentioned, Judge leading the majors and ops. Right behind him is guy having a very quiet season, and that's Shohei Ohtani. And it's hard for me to believe that. I'm not hearing as much about Shohei this year. I don't know if it's because we're Shohei fatigued a little bit here. He does lead the major leagues in runs
He's just
scored, which
being
is
a
interesting.
regular. He's just being a regular amazing player this year. It's not
Right.
like it's not such a magnitude better than everybody else where it's transcendent.
And if you take those top five and ops, and Pete Alonso's third, but Jonathan Aranda of Tampa is fourth. And now you probably could have got amazing odds in Vegas on him finishing in the top five, in ops in the major leagues, and so that suggests that he probably won't finish in the top five. But a terrific season and an indicator, at least for them, that they might have a real player there.
Right, right. And if you look at the top like 20 or so, the only guys that really stick out that you're like, I'm gonna keep my eye on, there's like three guys that jump out to me to be like, okay, from what I'm seeing here in the top 20, that I'm like, I'm gonna keep my eye on you to see if you can keep it up. And that's Jonathan Aranda, because he's never done it before, and so you obviously have to have some skepticism about that. You have to have the same thing with Ben Rice, though in his advanced stats from when he did play last year were very good. I kind of have to put George Springer up there just because he hasn't looked like this player for the last couple of seasons. So it's hard for me to believe, okay, yeah, baby, he's back and he's suddenly a close to 300 hitter again. But everybody else that's in the top 20, if you look at this list between Tatis, Teoscar Hernandez, Weiler, it is all the people you would generally expect to be in the top 20 of OPS. There's not a lot of surprises here. Maybe there's some names you'd think you'd see, like Soto, that aren't here, but everybody here you'd be like, yeah, that doesn't surprise me they're on this list.
I think that's a good point. And by the way, Springer is, I guess, battling with the who you mentioned, Paul Goldschmidt, for American League. Would that be, well? Can Goldschmidt be the American League Comeback Player of the Year? No, because he played in the National League last year. I don't know how they
Also,
do that
I feel like
that comeback.
comeback player of the year needs to be reserved for a guy that's coming back from adversity. Like Paul Goldschmidt's adversity can't be he was just not good.
Yes, it is. Yes, okay,
The
he
comeback
sucked last
player of
year and
the
he's
year.
better now. That's a
I want like
comeback.
I want a story here. I'm sorry. The idea that like Paul Goldschmidt is like, hey buddy, you're getting comeback player of the year because you just were ass last season.
In that list of ops guys also is Kyle Tucker, who I just noted today that the Dodgers apparently are interested in pursuing him as a free agent, and thought to myself, yeah, that would be what the Dodgers would
Well,
do, is
if
go and
they're,
get that
I'm
guy.
wondering this because the White Sox obviously have kind of continued their terrible brand of baseball, and they're probably thanking the lucky stars that the Colorado Rockies exist that they get that treatment this season instead of them. Now, the Rockies aren't doing themselves any favors in that regard, but just in regards to the White Sox, in terms of a premium outfielder being on the market, Luis Robert apparently is finally being shopped around. They're finally deciding to do that. And I'm hearing both the Mets and the Dodgers are interested with Blake Tidwell being floated around as a potential guy that they would trade in order to go and get Robert.
Tidwell pitched well today in the minor leagues, and I think that's a great point because center field is sort of a problem for the Mets, even if Siri comes back, and
Well,
Tyrone Taylor's done a nice job of holding down the fort, but it kind of feels like, man, we could do better there.
right. And as you know, not good. I'll put it that way. As Robert has been over the last season and a quarter now, it's really hard for me to fault. Like I can't imagine how toxic that playing environment is, especially for somebody that's actually good. Like
Soul
how are
sucking,
you?
maybe.
Right. Like I think it's just hard to keep focus. It's hard to be not necessarily give it your all, but just be there and present in the same way that you are on a team that actually has some hope. And so, yeah, he's hitting 186 right now, but I gotta think that if he was traded and was playing for a team that had literally major league talent at like any other position, he'd probably look a little bit better.
I think all he needs is like two for 5 games, and he would be hitting well over 200. So it wouldn't take very much for him to be
Exactly.
better.
So I would not be surprised to see him on the move. And for the Mets, they are getting some good news in that apparently Jose Siri is ahead on his progress of his recovery. He's already moving around, and Strider is apparently fighting to come
Yes.
back for the Braves, and they're giving him a little pushback, trying to decide when they think it's appropriate for him to come back.
The last guy I wanted to mention is a guy who also doesn't have a lot of help in the lineup and playing for a bad team, a young player, and that's James Wood, who, because he's only hitting 274 average wise, but he's got a 903 ops, and toward what you point out, with 10 home runs. And I think what impresses me is that the team isn't great, as we all know, and he doesn't have a lot of guys in that lineup protecting him. And so this is a player who I think isn't in the process of announcing himself, as opposed to a guy like Corbin Carroll, who was great a couple of years ago, is like returning to what you thought he was.
Right. And that was more Corbin Carroll just recovering after a slow start last season. It wasn't like he was back last season in any way.
We all expect. So on the pitching side, do you have a stat as well as to what would you use as your barometer? It better not be wins, I can tell you that.
Think it's tough because ERA plus doesn't necessarily feel super fair to both. It's hard to compare that
I
for
agree.
relievers and starters. I think pitchers, I still need more time. It's still too early. Relievers, they haven't had enough appearances yet. With the batters, they play every day. But a fourth of the season for the pitchers, you could have a terrible fourth of the season and win a Cy Young. So I don't really feel like I can project a lot for the pitchers nearly in the same way.
Interesting. I was choosing ERA, regular old ERA, as good a barometer as any at this point because WHIP is a nice stat, but it doesn't necessarily after 40 games project out as much as Max Fried has a 105 ERA for the Yankees in his 8 starts, and he's got 6 wins. That to me sounds like a guy who's going to start the All Star game.
Right. And like, FIP is a great stat, but it's one of those stats at times I feel like, well, it means that low number means guy good. I can't necessarily explain entirely why low number, like every single moving part that goes into low number
Right,
means good, but I
right.
know that. But it's like, it's not always the most regularly available stat. So it's hard to pick that as like my defining one for guys.
So go with me a second, and let's just talk about the guys that are at the top of the league as starting pitchers for ERA. And besides Max Fried, who leads by a significant margin, an unsustainable 105, as we said, Tyler Mahle is number two at 148, tied with Hunter Brown of the Astros, who's had an excellent season. But I think we really are not paying as much attention to Tyler Mahle, who came over from the Reds, and he is, a real, player, at this point, that I think is, you can believe in, that, this was a really good deal, I think, for the Rangers, and they need him very much, considering they're not hitting much themselves.
No, they need the help. But I think it kind of goes back to depending on the matchups and who you end up pitching against in the first quarter of the season. Like you play the Colorado Rockies a couple times as a pitcher, you're going to look great if you get two of your first six starts against them. That's going to help. Now, the pitchers have obviously they're probably closer to like 8 starts by this point, right? I'd say for
Yes,
each of
yeah,
them.
the 8 or 9, a couple of
8 or 9
9.
starts, right? But if you get the right combination of teams in those first 8 or 9 starts, just who you pitch against could have a big influence in that time period, more so than the batters, because you're just going to be playing everybody now.
Well, and the Rockies this week. I happen to be in Colorado right now, and drove past Coors Field today as I came back from the mountains. And the games hadn't started today. They were on the other night when they played a doubleheader that they lost. I think they lost 10-2 and 11-1, and then they topped it off with a 21-0 shellacking, all courtesy of the Padres.
Right, but
Yesterday, which
here's the only stat that tells you why nothing's going to change anytime soon. Yesterday's attendance for those Rocky games, 38,000.
it was a nice day.
Right, yeah, but that's a huge problem. If you're the ownership group, why are you going to go? Because there was a big report that came out today that said that the Pirates are one of the most profitable franchises in baseball. Which I am
That's
sure Pirates ownership, which that was the last thing they wanted to have get
that's
announced.
disgusting. It's
Right,
disgusting, and yeah, that shouldn't
and,
be.
they would argue that they made a big move this week as they went and fired manager Derek Shelton after we talked about. I don't think we'll see Derek Shelton fired, but kind of like we had mentioned, depending on how Pirate management saw it, if they had expectations for that team more so than, maybe we as the fans sort of expected them to, they would look at this 14-27 start and say, this isn't it. We need to make a fix.
Well, and I think there's a lot of reasons why. When you think about having Skeens at the top of your rotation, and I think Jared Jones is still hurt, and Mitch Keller, they had the foundations of some three very good starting pitchers. They've got O'Neil Cruz, who, credit the organization, if you want. I don't know how much Derek Shelton had to do with it, but in getting a guy who you've remarked was the worst defensive shortstop in baseball in O'Neil Cruz at a shortstop and putting him in center field, where he has flourished, and really turned his entire game around. And so no credit to Derek Shelton for that. I mean, O'Neil Cruz is a guy who walks now. He was a guy who didn't used to walk, and he steals bases at a rate that he's never done before. He was a 20 to 30 steal guy. He's on a pace for more than 60 this year. He's injured at the moment a little bit, but the point is that you've got these young players there, and are you wasting the best years of Paul Skeens' career by not having a team that's good enough to compete right now? That's why you fire the manager.
Exactly. And you would say, look, and maybe we don't have all of the pieces to compete talent-wise with the best teams in the NL, but we should be better than we are. And from what I was seeing from Pirate fans, there was a lot of questionable decisions when it came to bullpen usage, which how much you want to argue is that is results-based is tough, but Pirate fans seem to point out he had a unique situation for not necessarily picking the wrong guy, but just like the completely worst possible person in any given situation. And apparently it was one of those rotating carousel style lineups where you never really know who was hitting or where. And for a team that's almost as bad as the Rockies are this year offensively in terms of scoring runs, whatever he was trying, it wasn't working.
No, and of course they get rid of Derek Shelton and they immediately go out and take 2 out of 3 from the Braves this weekend. And the Braves keep trying to sneak up on 500, and they got to within a game, and then they can't do it, and they're still not there. And not that that's a tremendous long-term problem, but it's a little surprising that they haven't made that ground up, particularly when you play a team like the Pirates.
Well, they've run into the same problem that a team over in Minnesota this week ran into, as the Minnesota Twins and the St. Louis Cardinals actually both finished off fantastic stretches with 8 game win streaks. But the problem for the Minnesota Twins is that while they went 8-2 in their last 10 on that 8 game winning streak, all of the teams above them in the AL Central went 7-3 over that same time span. So all the teams above them are playing equally well, so they made up like 1 game despite winning 8 in a row. So that's just brutal on your season right there.
Yeah, and the Royals, are still not hitting. I mean, Vinny Pasquantino has been terrible. So,
I think not hitting might be a little bit of an understatement for how bad they've been
well, and because they're
offensively.
getting pitching, we were talking about the starting pitch before, and I think I defy anybody to know that Kris Dubic is in the top 5, in ERA in the American League, because you think the Royals and you're thinking Cole Ragans,
Mhm.
and then everybody else, Seth Lugo and stuff like that. And this guy quietly has had a nice season, and that's the only reasons why the Royals are still able to maintain that winning streak, because, like you said, they can't hit their way out of a paper bag.
Right, right. And they have to be feeling not great about that Jonathan India trade right now because he's not doing anything for them over there out in left. He's hitting 220 right now. Now, obviously, if you're the Royals, you could look at it and say, well, the only place we have to go is up, obviously offensively, as right now they're interestingly dead last in the major leagues in terms of home runs per game, hitting a paltry .66 home runs per game, which is just ugh. In this modern MLB, I don't know how much you can get away with hitting like that.
And is anybody really surprised, when you look at that lineup up and down? It was a problem before the season, and it's still a problem. And that just like the Mariners last year. Like when are they going to go and get some hitting? Well, they kind of did a little of that, but they're just hitting better this year. That's not happening with the Royals.
Right, and obviously, the Mariners are helped out. Cal Raleigh is hitting, really well. But I do think that is an important thing as a team, and as I think on a franchise level, you're gonna look at because I think one of the things you and I have talked about, we go to ball games every once and pretty often. I say we go a couple different times a year, and honestly, I feel like as a fan, a lot of times you're like, well, as long as you see a home run, it wasn't a total. Even if they lose, it's not the worst. Obviously, you seeing your team hit a home run and win is better, or just win in general is better. I take a win and no home runs over a loss and a home run, but a home run is the most exciting thing you're generally going to see at the ballpark. So I think it's interesting when you look at these lineups that if you're going and watching a Pittsburgh Kansas City game this season, it's gotta be rough. You might not see any balls leave the park for like the entire series for your team or any
Yeah,
team for that matter.
and obviously we'd all we go to watch our home team play. You'd rather see a win, but you're right saying, well, if they didn't win, at least you got to watch a home run or two by your team, which somehow you got to stand up and cheer and when to go and listen to the music. And that because if you don't hit a home run in those games and you lose, it just sometimes it feels so quiet, like you just got there and
Right.
nothing ever
Right.
happened for your team.
Especially for the in the ballpark experience. I think it's very different for the at home watching experience. But I
Definitely.
definitely think if you're a Yankee fan, it makes going to Yankee Stadium fun when they hit a ton of home runs there and you're constantly getting to stand up and cheer because Judge hit another one. And the Mariners, which are traditionally a team that don't hit a lot of home runs, are finally having a season where they're hitting the ball out of the park because they're in the top 5, I think, this season. And
They
they're
are. They're
usually
there.
their team that's very much hurt by their ballpark, I think.
Yeah, and the Orioles last year, who were finished fourth in Major League Baseball in home runs, they dropped down to 10th, which doesn't seem like it would hurt them as much as it has, but it really has made a big difference because that team is just struggling for any kind of offense they can get to.
I do think it's interesting that if I look at that Oriole team, what's how much are they missing Anthony Santander? I didn't think that he would prove to be such a big hole in that lineup, but they really look like they miss him this season.
Well, and that's a great point because there's a couple players like that. And when you talk about the Astros, and I mean, they're bumping along, and they're still the Astros, but Alvarez is hurt, a little banged up, and now Altuve is, as
Mhm.
well. But I believe they're missing because they're missing Bregman, who's man, how do you if you got to be Houston looking at Alex
Well,
Bregman
I
going,
think they're also
why
missing
did we do
Kyle
that?
Tucker.
And Kyle Tucker, right? So two guys who not only did you lose them, they're going and they're raking, for their new teams. And so, you got to go, wow, we kind of missed out there on something, in a big way, in a
And
big
and
way.
obviously, you that's why you're looking at that division, and props to the Sacramento Athletics as they're continuing on to continue on. But that division looks like it's going to be a dogfight because the Seattle Mariners, I don't, especially with Logan Gilbert's potential injury, and we don't know when he's going to be back. I don't think they're going to be good enough to separate themselves out. And we keep saying that eventually the Texas Rangers are going to figure it out, but like eventually they got to figure it out, right?
I think I do. I still believe that. It looks like Seager's finally starting to hit, and I'm a believer that as he goes offensively, that team goes.
Mhm.
And so he's been a little banged up, obviously this season. But if he gets it going, they have enough pitching. They've gotten some very good pitching, and not from just the resurgent Jacob deGrom. Nathan Eovaldi has been terrific, one of the very best pitchers in baseball. And I imagine a lot of people don't even know that Nathan Eovaldi is on the Rangers.
I would have
So.
seen him pitching for them in the World Series a few years ago when they won.
Yes, yes, that's true. But I don't know. I think he's a guy who just gets forgotten. He seems like a mercenary, like he's just gonna. But you're right. He's been there a few years now, and he's pitched well. There for a few years now. So yeah, there. I think you're right about the dogfight. Although in my heart of hearts, as much as I jokingly picked the Athletics to finish second, I don't think that's going to be sustainable either. Quite frankly. So I would
Especially
say.
because they have a negative 28 run differential so far to this point in the season. And that's usually not something that, like, when you look at teams that are, have good win-loss records despite having a bad run differential, that's usually not a good sign for that team.
You mean like the Cleveland Guardians,
Hmm.
which
And
is
I think
exact.
that's I think that's why you could look at their division mate in the Detroit Tigers and be like, that team's might be for real. They're
Yeah,
plus 72.
I feel it too. Although they did get some bad news this weekend. Casey Mize went on the IL, and there's another pitcher, a young pitcher that not as many people know about him as they will know about him because while Skubal has had a great couple of weeks to get himself back up near the league leaders, Casey Mize kind of kept that team going when Skubal was, I don't know, scuffling a little, maybe you want to
For
call it
him,
that.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah, for him, and I mean, it's still very good. So yeah, and meanwhile, the Yankees they beat up like you said on the A's today, but they're not separating themselves from the Red Sox, who just don't seem to me to be a team that has really yet started firing on all cylinders. At least that's the way it feels to me.
They're starting to get that pitching from Garrett Crochet, though.
Yeah, yeah, he's going to be up there at the end of the year, vying for the Cy Young award. I think I
Mhm.
had that sort of pick before there. And in the National League, you've got that same dogfight that I think is going to happen all season. We still maybe differ on the Giants being able to hang in there for the long run, but man, thank goodness the Rockies are in that division, so those teams have a patsy to beat up on because they're going to do it to themselves. Other than that.
And I'm going to say this right now. I would not be surprised if this continues up that we see somebody named Hunter Green enter the conversation for Cy Young this year, especially if he keeps up his first, quarter of the season
He's
performance.
injured
He's going to
too.
be right. He's good, but he's going to be somebody that's going to be up there as long
I
as he
mean, the
comes
guy
back in time.
he pumps 102-mile-an-hour fastballs regularly during games, and thinking, okay, is that an arm injury waiting to happen? Because we see what happens when the starting pitchers do that. Skeens hasn't had it happen to him yet, and I think he's backed off a little bit, knowing that there's just no way to sustain
It's just
pitching
not
like that.
sustainable to try and pitch like that.
It isn't, but and I think in that division with Skeens, obviously the Pirates in last place, I think the Cubs are going to win that division by 10 games.
Comfortably.
Comfortably,
Yes.
comfortably. The Cardinals are making us look a little silly, and I've been riding Ali Marmol for 2 years now, and they just went on that 8-game winning streak to put themselves over 500. And so, but I think it's just temporary, and they can go through a bad streak. The Reds I don't know. I like Terry Francona, but that hasn't really come around, even with Hunter Green pitching well. I just the Brewers, I don't believe in them. Do you? So,
I think
so
last year was as good as it gets for them.
I think so too. And in the East, you've got the team that I think
The
Met fans.
Phillies are coming,
Yep,
and the Mets
be
are
careful of the
right. Right.
Phillies.
If you're the Mets, you're loving where you are because you're ahead of where you expected to be because you're like, you know what, we're only dealing with the Phillies right now, and hopefully the Braves just never get to put it together, so we don't really have to think about them at all.
Wouldn't that be great? By the way, I think you're so right. I think like from the Mets perspective, going, yeah, let's just have the Braves just have one of those years where they never got it going because the Nationals and the Marlins, they're not going to do anything. And so in some respects, is a little easier, in the East because you have three good teams as instead, and that's if you include the Braves there, which I do.
Right,
But
right.
that
But
the Nats
hopefully,
and the Marlins, no.
we're still talking about how well we're still counting them as a good team because their performance doesn't show it come like mid-August.
And they're going to get Strider back, and they're going to get Acuna back. And I'm sorry, like I said in other podcasts, you'll have to put a stake in the Braves before you have me go, oh yeah, they're done. Because I just don't feel that way. So
Well,
yeah,
hopefully we can start looking. We can start looking for those stakes come like July instead of September this year.
I'm surprised they haven't made it, like I said already. So, but yeah, I think we're not looking at any epic seasons in terms of statistics on either side, right? From the pitchers,
Mhm.
or the hitters. Like a guy would have to have 20 homers now for you to go. Wait a second, he's got 20 homers in a quarter season. That he doesn't have to do that much more in the next, but that hasn't happened, right? Judge jumped up to get to
No,
14, but he's only on pace for fifth only on
he's
pace
in
for
400.
56. Yeah, he's hitting 400. Can he sustain that? I'd love to see it. I'm not counting on it, and I don't think real fans are expecting that either. It's
No,
the only way you hit 400 these days is to get to 400 or get above 400, and then you get dinged up for like 2 months, and so you end up with just having barely enough plate appearances to qualify.
that doesn't really count.
Well, no, it counts if you
Right, right. But
qualify.
nobody, people would not look at that nearly as favorably. Like,
Is
especially
it
if it
his
was like,
fault if he got injured for a month and lost just enough plate appearances that the more you play, the less likely you're going to sustain that 400 average. We've seen that happen
true.
time and time again. So, but yeah, we'll check back on this maybe halfway through and see how different it compares to this
Oh, I'm
particular
sure.
time frame.
Well, I think Aaron Judge will still be there.
Yeah, I think he will too.